Canadian Premier is meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney in Saskatchewan today, and one of the big topics of discussion will be nation-building projects and...
We're working very much in partnership around this table in terms of our priorities and how we're defining it. And that's what this meeting is about.
$9 billion. That's how much one Canadian province just agreed to give away to America over the next decade, and their own Prime Minister found out by reading about it online like everyone else. The leaked 12-page document stamped "Confidential, Do Not Share" revealed Premier Doug Ford's secret negotiations with Trump's administration. Ontario would sell electricity at one-third market price for 10 years, all arranged behind federal backs. When it surfaced at midnight on May 27th, it triggered Canada's biggest constitutional crisis in history. How does a provincial politician secretly commit billions without federal approval? And when Commerce Secretary Lutnick bragged that Ontario folded completely, what did that reveal about America's strategy to divide and conquer its northern neighbor? What drove an electricity system whistleblower to risk everything by leaking this explosive document? This isn't just about money. It's about the survival of democracy itself.
The steel offensive. Your grocery bills, construction costs, and manufactured goods were about to get much more expensive, until Ontario's Premier took matters into his own hands. The crisis began on March 10th, when President Donald Trump announced a sweeping 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum. "Canada has taken advantage of us for too long," Trump declared from the Oval Office. "Their unfair trade practices hurt American workers and threaten our national security." For Ontario, the stakes couldn't have been higher. The province accounts for roughly 70% of Canadian steel production, with integrated supply chains stretching across the Great Lakes region. $12 billion in Canadian steel exports now faced punishing tariffs. Industry analysts immediately projected devastating consequences. 30,000 direct jobs at risk, price increases of 15 to 20% on everything from automobiles to refrigerators, and the potential collapse of smaller manufacturers caught in the crossfire. This is an economic missile aimed directly at Hamilton, Sault Ste. Marie, and Windsor, explained University of Toronto economist Patricia Westbrook. The tariffs target our most vulnerable manufacturing communities already struggling with global competition. Investment firms issued urgent warnings to clients. Royal Bank of Canada projected a 0.4% hit to national GDP, with Ontario bearing 70% of the impact. The Toronto Stock Exchange plunged 400 points within hours of the announcement, as investors dumped shares in steel producers like Stelco and Dofasco. Prime Minister Mark Carney, barely 2 months into office, promised a measured, strategic response. His Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc announced plans to consult with industry leaders and provincial governments before determining Canada's official retaliation. "We must act as one country with one voice," LeBlanc emphasized in a hastily organized press conference. Meanwhile, in the wood-paneled office of Ontario's Premier Doug Ford, fury was building into something more dangerous, a unilateral response that would bypass Ottawa entirely. Hold on. Before we reveal the next secret, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you stay up to date with every breaking news. Just click the logo in the bottom right corner. Power play? When does protecting your region become betraying your nation? While Ottawa scrambled to formulate a response to President Donald Trump's 25% steel tariff, Premier Doug Ford moved first, and fast. He slapped a matching 25% surcharge on electricity exports to Michigan, New York, and Minnesota, effective immediately. "If they want to hit our steel, we'll hit their lights," he declared. Ontario wasn't bluffing. The province supplies over $1.3 billion in electricity annually to the northern United States, much of it during peak summer and winter demand. The move struck a nerve. Former Ontario Energy Board Chair Marie Lemieux warned that without Ontario's surplus power, American grid stability would collapse. The Wall Street Journal estimated household energy costs could jump $16 a month. Ford escalated further, threatening to ban American alcohol in provincial stores and blacklist U.S. firms from Ontario contracts. Pressure points worth billions. Markets panicked. Mid-continent electricity futures jumped 67% in a single day, and utility stocks nosedived. But this wasn't about immediate retaliation. The surcharge was never the endgame. It was leverage. Ford had just played his first card in a secretive, high-stakes negotiation that would upend Canada's constitutional order, the Washington Whispers. The most consequential call in recent Canadian-American relations wasn't between heads of state. It was a private line from Washington to Toronto that circumvented Ottawa entirely. On March 11th, just one day after Ford's electricity surcharge announcement, United States Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick placed a confidential call directly to the Ontario Premier. According to 3 sources familiar with the conversation, Lutnick offered Ford something extraordinary: a private meeting to discuss a potential bilateral understanding that could exempt Ontario from the harshest impacts of Trump's trade offensive. The invitation came with striking urgency. Meet before April 2nd, when Trump threatened to double the tariffs to 50%. It also came with an explicit condition: come alone without federal representatives. Ford accepted immediately. On March 13th, with no public announcement of his travel plans, the Ontario Premier's government jet landed at Washington Dulles International Airport. Rather than visiting the Canadian Embassy as protocol would dictate, Ford was whisked directly to the United States Department of Commerce building for a closed-door meeting with Lutnick and a small team of trade officials. Notably absent, anyone representing the Canadian federal government. No diplomats, no trade representatives, no officials from the Prime Minister's office. Canadian Ambassador Kirsten Hillman reportedly learned of Ford's visit only after security cameras captured his arrival at the Commerce Department. Inside the wood-paneled conference room over a 5-hour session, Ford and Lutnick hammered out what would become the Energy and Industrial Stability Side Letter, a document explicitly designed to sit alongside the Trump-era United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement without requiring federal Canadian approval. The Commerce Secretary understood our pain points perfectly, one member of Ford's delegation later confided, and he came prepared with very specific offers targeting Ontario's unique vulnerabilities. What emerged from that meeting, drafted on Commerce Department letterhead and stamped "Confidential, do not share," would soon throw Canada's entire approach to Trump's trade aggression into chaos. Look, we verified the leak, tracked down industry reactions, and broke down what that 12-page side letter really means. Now you've got the truth behind the whistleblower's risk and what it exposed. If that kind of research matters, tap like or sub to support what comes next. The Energy Gambit. The deal was unprecedented. A provincial leader pledging to cap Ontario's electricity export price at 18 United States dollars per megawatt hour, 1/3 of the current market rate over the next 10 years. The leaked document revealed extraordinary concessions. Ontario would artificially suppress the price of its most valuable export, clean hydroelectric power, regardless of market conditions or domestic Canadian needs. The province would withdraw its 25% surcharge immediately and guarantee uninterrupted flows across the border, even during peak demand periods. Most shockingly, the side letter bound future Ontario governments by requiring American consent before any new provincial electricity taxes could be imposed, effectively surrendering provincial sovereignty to a foreign power. This is energy colonialism, declared former Ontario Power Generation Chief Executive Officer Margaret Wilson. We're giving away our most valuable renewable resource at fire sale prices. Financial analysts calculated the staggering implications. Ontario's annual electricity export revenue would plummet from $1.3 billion to $400 million, a $900 million annual shortfall passed to Ontario ratepayers. $18 per megawatt hour isn't just below market rate, it's below production cost. During demand peaks, electricity regularly trades at 5 to 10 times that amount. The agreement guaranteed American utilities 10 years of subsidized Canadian power. Inside the independent electricity system operator, an employee stared at their screen in disbelief. Their next decision would expose secrets that powerful people desperately wanted hidden. The whistleblower's choice. Inside the independent electricity system operator, one person discovered the side letter attached to Premier Ford's directive, instructing operators to set the tariff response charge to 0 immediately. I realized I was looking at something that shouldn't exist, the whistleblower later told journalists anonymously. A provincial government cannot make treaties with foreign powers. It's a fundamental constitutional principle. The decision to leak carried enormous personal risk. Government whistleblowers face potential criminal charges, civil liability, and career destruction. After 3 sleepless nights, they contacted energy industry publication Utility Dive, believing specialized reporters would understand the constitutional implications. Using encrypted communications, they transmitted the 12-page document with internal emails. Within hours, the story exploded. Politico published excerpts, including quotes from Commerce Secretary Lutnick, describing how Ontario had folded to American pressure. By morning, major Canadian outlets led with the bombshell revelation. The leak drew comparisons to other pivotal moments in Canadian history, including the 2008 North American Free Trade Agreement Gate memo. As headlines spread, a deeper truth emerged about carving out special protections that would fundamentally alter Canada's approach to international trade, the tariff shield. 2,600,000 Ontario-made vehicles would be protected, a carve-out designed to shield Ford's province while leaving Quebec and western provinces exposed to American protectionism. The American concessions were explicitly provincial, rather than national. In exchange for cheap electricity, the United States would exempt Ontario-made vehicles from any auto duties President Trump might impose, a figure matching Ontario's annual production capacity. The automobile sector employs nearly 100,000 workers directly and supports 300,000 additional jobs. Major plants in Oshawa, Brampton, Windsor, Cambridge, and Alliston produce vehicles with 80% destined for American consumers. This is an Ontario-specific lifeboat, explained to automotive analyst James Ravindran. The exemption wouldn't apply to vehicles assembled in Quebec or parts manufactured in Manitoba. Additional concessions included allowing Ontario mining firms to bid on United States federal contracts, otherwise barred to Canadian companies, and White House commitment to oppose congressional Buy American rules targeting Ontario specifically. Quebec reacted with immediate outrage. This creates 2 classes of Canadian provinces, Premier Mathieu Blanchard declared. Those protected by Ontario's side deal, and those left exposed to American tariffs. The economic lifeline would cost more than dollars. It threatened Canada's constitutional order. Yet perhaps the most stunning aspect was how federal leadership discovered this arrangement. The Prime Minister blindsided. Mark Carney learned about the deal the same way millions of Canadians did, by reading about it in Politico. 7 weeks into his mandate as Prime Minister, sworn in on April 1st, Carney had been building a unified Canadian response to Trump's trade aggression. His background as former governor of both the Bank of Canada and Bank of England informed a careful, strategic approach, now completely undermined. The Prime Minister was incandescent. One senior advisor told the Globe and Mail. This wasn't just overstepping, it was conducting foreign policy without federal knowledge or consent. Carney confirmed that neither he nor Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc had been briefed on Ford's Washington visit or the resulting side letter. The first indication came only when Ford suspended the electricity surcharge in mid-March without explanation. The contrast between leaders was stark. Carney, the Oxford-educated technocrat with global financial connections, approached the dispute through conventional diplomatic channels. Ford, the business-oriented populist, bypassed traditional structures entirely. There are proper channels for these discussions, Carney stated. Canada speaks with one voice internationally. That voice belongs to the federal government. Behind closed doors, the Prime Minister's office consulted Justice Department lawyers regarding potential violations of the Foreign Affairs Act, which reserves treaty-making powers for the federal cabinet. Constitutional experts debated whether Ford's commercial understanding constituted a treaty, creating ambiguity about Ottawa's enforcement options. Emergency meetings were called, experts consulted, and a previously unthinkable question emerged. Had a provincial premier usurped federal authority to conduct foreign affairs? The federal fury. Canada's unified approach to American trade pressure shattered along provincial lines, leaving the new Prime Minister facing both external threats and internal rebellion. Mark Carney's response came swiftly. In a nationally televised address, the Prime Minister characterized Ford's actions as an extraordinary breach of cooperative federalism that undermined Canada's international standing. 158 years ago, Canada began speaking to the world with one voice on matters of trade and foreign affairs, Carney declared, his composure barely containing visible anger. That voice belongs to the democratically elected federal government. No province has the constitutional authority to negotiate separate deals with foreign powers. The Privy Council Office announced a formal inquiry into potential violations of Canada's Foreign Affairs Act. The Prime Minister's office contacted the United States State Department to clarify that Canada did not recognize any side letter negotiated without federal participation. Opposition parties seized on the crisis. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre accused Carney of losing control of the provinces. New Democratic Party leader Jagmeet Singh demanded criminal sanctions and emergency legislation to prohibit provincial governments from conducting independent foreign relations. Media coverage split along regional lines. The Toronto Sun praised Ford's bold leadership, while the Globe and Mail condemned his constitutional vandalism. Quebec's French-language press criticized an Ontario-specific deal that left Quebec's industries exposed. Constitutional experts would deliver their verdict. Premier Ford had potentially violated the very foundation of Canadian federalism. The federal fury? Canada's unified approach to American trade pressure shattered along provincial lines, leaving the new Prime Minister facing both external threats and internal rebellion. Mark Carney's response came swiftly. In a nationally televised address, the Prime Minister characterized Ford's actions as an extraordinary breach of cooperative federalism that undermined Canada's international standing. 158 years ago, Canada began speaking to the world with one voice on matters of trade and foreign affairs, Carney declared, his composure barely containing visible anger. That voice belongs to the democratically elected federal government. No province has the constitutional authority to negotiate separate deals with foreign powers. The Privy Council Office announced a formal inquiry into potential violations of Canada's Foreign Affairs Act. The Prime Minister's office contacted the United States State Department to clarify that Canada did not recognize any side letter negotiated without federal participation. Opposition parties seized on the crisis. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre accused Carney of losing control of the provinces. New Democratic Party leader Jagmeet Singh demanded criminal sanctions and emergency legislation to prohibit provincial governments from conducting independent foreign relations. Media coverage split along regional lines. The Toronto Sun praised Ford's bold leadership, while the Globe and Mail condemned his constitutional vandalism. Quebec's French-language press criticized an Ontario-specific deal that left Quebec's industries exposed. Constitutional experts would deliver their verdict. Premier Ford had potentially violated the very foundation of Canadian federalism. The economic equations. Ontario's electricity revenue from American exports was about to plummet from $1.3 billion annually to $400 million, a sacrifice Premier Ford deemed acceptable to protect the province's industrial heartland. Financial analysts compared three scenarios: the pre-deal baseline, the side letter implementation, and potential collapse of negotiations. Under the status quo, Ontario's electricity exports generated $1.3 billion annually, with prices fluctuating between $50 and $60 per megawatt hour during normal conditions and spiking to several $100s during demand peaks. The side letter scenario locks in an $18 price cap, reducing annual revenue to $400 million, a nearly 70% decline. This $900 million annual shortfall would be absorbed through higher domestic rates, reduced infrastructure investment, or tax increases. Should the deal collapse and Ford re-implement his 25% surcharge, American households in affected states would face estimated $16 monthly increases in their utility bills. Meanwhile, Ontario's auto sector would remain fully exposed to Trump's threatened tariffs. Ford essentially traded long-term electricity revenue for immediate protection of manufacturing jobs, explained Royal Bank of Canada senior economist Devin McKenzie. Independent analysis from the C.D. Howe Institute projected that while the side letter would preserve approximately 38,000 Ontario manufacturing jobs short-term, artificially suppressed electricity prices would cost the province approximately $9 billion in cumulative lost revenue, creating what the Institute called a massive intergenerational wealth transfer from Ontario taxpayers to American ratepayers. In manufacturing towns across southern Ontario, workers who had feared for their jobs wondered if their premier had saved their livelihoods at the cost of Canadian unity. Their provincial legislature would soon face its own reckoning. The provincial backlash. The Queen's Park legislature erupted into chaos as opposition Liberals tabled a motion of non-confidence, a nuclear option that could bring down the government and unravel the controversial side letter. Inside Ontario's provincial parliament, reaction broke strictly along party lines. Progressive Conservative members defended their leader's decisive action to protect Ontario jobs, while opposition benches denounced an unconstitutional overreach and secret diplomacy. Ontario Liberal leader Yasmin Patel formally tabled a motion of non-confidence, potentially triggering a provincial election. Premier Ford has exceeded his authority and compromised not just Ontario's interests, but the very structure of our federation, Patel declared. The non-confidence vote, scheduled for June 5th, created a ticking clock. With Ford's party holding only a slim majority, the defection of just 4 progressive Conservative members would topple the government. Business reactions split between sectors. Auto manufacturers and steel producers praised the Premier's courageous leadership. Magna International credited Ford with saving thousands of supply chain jobs that would have otherwise been lost to tariffs. Meanwhile, Ontario's energy producers expressed alarm. The association representing independent power producers warned of long-term damage to investment confidence and questioned whether artificially suppressed export prices would make planned green energy projects financially unviable. Public opinion polls revealed a province divided along regional and demographic lines. Manufacturing-heavy communities in southern Ontario showed strong support for Ford's intervention, while Toronto residents and northern communities dependent on hydroelectric generation expressed opposition. Overall, 46% of Ontarians approved of the Premier's actions, while 44% disapproved, a statistical dead heat. Cities like Windsor and Oshawa passed resolutions supporting the side letter. Toronto City Council condemned the agreement as unconstitutional and urged federal intervention. The non-confidence vote scheduled for June 5th wouldn't just determine Ford's political future, it would decide whether the side letter survived long enough to protect Ontario from Trump's looming July 9th auto tariff deadline. The White House calculation. How does a superpower divide and conquer its smaller neighbor? One province at a time. The United States administration maintained a carefully calibrated public position on the leaked side letter. This represents an Ontario commitment, we sign nothing. White House Press Secretary Julian Martinez insisted. The Commerce Department characterized the document as discussion points rather than a binding agreement. Yet, behind this official distancing, a strategic pattern emerged. 3 separate sources confirmed to Washington Post reporters that President Trump had personally approved Commerce Secretary Lutnick's negotiating framework before the March 13th meeting with Ford. The president loved the idea of dealing directly with the provinces. One senior trade advisor revealed anonymously. He specifically said, "If Canada won't give us what we want, we'll make separate deals with the parts of Canada that will." This approach represented a significant evolution in United States trade strategy. Historically, Washington has negotiated exclusively with Ottawa, respecting the constitutional division of powers within Canadian federalism. The direct outreach to Ford created a precedent for bypassing federal authorities, when provincial interests might be played against national ones. This isn't just about tariffs or electricity, explained former United States Ambassador to Canada David Jacobson. It establishes a template for disaggregating Canada into component parts. Today it's Ontario and electricity. Tomorrow it could be Alberta and oil, or Quebec and aluminum. Internal Commerce Department memos described the Ontario approach as a sovereignty stress test to determine how far provincial and federal interests could be separated. The documents revealed a deliberate strategy to identify and exploit natural tensions within the Canadian Federation. The White House strategy became clear. This wasn't about tariffs, but about fundamentally weakening Canada's ability to negotiate as a unified nation. The grid entanglement. The electrical grid connecting Ontario to Michigan, New York, and Minnesota wasn't just infrastructure. It had become a geopolitical weapon in economic warfare. Few Americans realize their dependence on Canadian electricity. The interconnected North American grid functions as a single system, with power flowing freely across the border. Ontario's hydroelectric resources provide crucial baseload power and peak capacity to northern states, where domestic generation is insufficient. During summer heat waves, Ontario exports prevent brownouts across the American Midwest. In winter deep freezes, Canadian Power keeps heating systems operational when regional generators reach capacity. The grid integration creates a unique vulnerability, explained energy security analyst Thomas Chen. You can stockpile oil or natural gas, but electricity must be consumed the moment it's generated. When Ford threatened to switch off exports, he identified a pressure point few had previously considered. Michigan imports approximately 17% of its total electricity consumption from Ontario. For New York State, Canadian imports represent nearly 25% of total supply during peak winter periods. Minnesota's northern regions rely on Canadian power for grid stability during extreme weather events. Utility executives across affected states calculated the financial windfall from artificially capped Canadian electricity, the equivalent of receiving a $9 billion subsidy paid for by Ontario taxpayers. This isn't just about keeping prices low, admitted one Michigan utility executive. It's about securing a guaranteed supply at predictable prices, regardless of market conditions. The implications would soon test Canada's newest Prime Minister in ways he never anticipated. The leadership test. Mark Carney hadn't expected his first major crisis as Prime Minister to come from within Canada's borders. Yet here he was, facing a constitutional showdown that would define his leadership. His April 1st swearing in as Prime Minister had followed his predecessor's unexpected resignation. Carney had been recruited directly from the private sector, having never previously held elected office. His technocratic approach contrasted sharply with Ford's populist instincts. "I will not allow Canada to be dismantled for negotiating purposes," Carney declared from the Prime Minister's office. "We are not the 51st state, nor will we be treated as such." Any discussions with our American partners must respect Canadian sovereignty and occur on equal terms. His emphasis on maintaining federal authority over international relations reflected both constitutional principles and practical concerns about Canada's ability to present a unified front. If provinces could cut separate deals, Canada's collective leverage would disintegrate. The scheduled June 12th appearance before the House Foreign Affairs Committee loomed as a critical test. Parliamentary committees wield significant investigative power, and members from all parties would press Carney on whether his government had maintained sufficient oversight of provincial activities. How he handles this crisis will establish the template for federal-provincial relations throughout his mandate, explained political scientist Diane Rousseau. If provinces perceive weakness now, similar end runs around federal authority will follow. Carney's appearance wouldn't just address the immediate crisis. It would establish whether Ottawa could reassert its constitutional authority. The stakes extended far beyond politics to the very nature of Canadian federalism, the Federation's future. When provinces cut their own deals with foreign powers, what's left of national sovereignty? Ontario's secret tariff agreement with Washington has triggered a constitutional crisis. Canada's system divides powers between Ottawa and the provinces. But when Ontario bypasses federal authority on international trade, it threatens that balance. If provinces negotiate trade policy, what is federal power even for? Asks scholar Robert McKinnon. The side letter opens the door for other provinces, like British Columbia or Alberta, to strike their own deals with China or Asia, shattering Canada's united front. Former Foreign Affairs Minister John Manley warns, Canada's leverage on the world stage depends on acting collectively. Splintered trade policy means weaker global influence. Ottawa now faces tough choices: challenge the deal in court, fold it into national policy, or wait for Ford's government to collapse after the June 5th non-confidence vote. Historian Margaret Atwood puts it bluntly: are we one nation, or a patchwork of regions chasing separate interests? This isn't just a legal fight. It's a turning point in what kind of country Canada wants to be. So, can a federation survive when provinces go rogue with superpowers? Is this a uniquely Canadian problem or a warning to every democracy? Let me know what you think down in the comments. If you found this eye-opening, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Stay up to date with the latest breaking news. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.